Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this first day of a new series I'm calling Wildly Loved. And you might be like, why are you calling it that? And here's why. Many years ago, when I was earning my hours, I ran a group that I called Loved. It was a group therapy dynamic with about 8 to 10 people, and it was really rooted in attachment theory. And then we would process and talk about all the different experiences and wounds of the members' lives. And it was honestly one of the most glorious experiences of my therapeutic career. And I still see a handful of these individuals in individual therapy occasionally, and some a little more regularly. But the experience of group therapy, I have to say, is it's an incredible experience. It has become harder for me to do group therapy given the fact that I'm trying to support my family and my career's grown and I have all these things I want to do. But I would like to try to create this group experience somehow through my platform, through my content, through the community I hope to build in my online courses, and right here just on these YouTube videos and on my TikTok videos. So if you are new, please consider subscribing and following me on TikTok for daily mental health content. And I think this series is gonna be hopefully a daily, if not Monday through Friday, and worst case Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of dynamic. I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think. I really wanted to find a way to create short targeted videos really about topics related to healing childhood and healing relationships, and with every video to be sort of under the umbrella of this first series around trauma brain and what that is, and we'll go into that in a minute, and then how all of that plays out in our lives and relationships. So for us to talk about those things and for then to leave each video with whether it's a journal exercise or, something to think about, or some kind of physical, neurological sort of polyvagal theory, dynamic thought, exercise, nervous system regulator, thing like that. And so that's the goal of this series. And so I'm really hoping that you will all find it helpful. So let's talk a bit quickly about trauma brain as an overarching concept, because what I've learned more and more is that even though I have done, I'm getting over COVID, many of you know that, so much work, and I'm still in therapy and I have no intention of ending it anytime soon, is that I had a pretty traumatic childhood and frankly a pretty traumatic adult life. As a result, oftentimes, of the consequences. Some things were, more controllable than others. But what's happened is that my nervous system has learned to live and settle very comfortably in the trauma response, in hypervigilance, in always kind of thinking about, what to do next and where to go next. And you can see that even in my content, probably even in the courses that I made. I kind of just threw myself into those with so much love, but it was a lot of time. And so sometimes I will stretch myself out too thin. And along those lines, really quickly, I am almost done with a journal that I threw myself into because I realized that there needed to be some kind of supplement to things for all my content. And it's going to be hopefully out soon. But really it is about helping you unpack your childhood, who you were and who you are today, and kind of integrating that stuff. So the thing is, I can spread myself out thin because in some ways I'm either, distracting or I'm working. I'm always feeling like, at any moment I'm going to lose everything I have. And that's not a really healthy way to go through life. And so one of my journey challenges is learning to lean in. And so what I've realized is that, with all the knowledge and education and even therapy, and of course we're all different, but I think so many of us, with what we're learning about trauma, what has happened is that in our childhood, we had to make adaptations. We had to tweak things. We had to respond certain ways to survive those childhoods. Now, when I say survive, I mean everything from truly survive with your life to emotionally survive. Whether it was not having your emotions ever acknowledged or emotions being dangerous in your house, right? There's such a wide variation. But the problem is we make those adaptations, and those adaptations live in our brain, in our DNA, in the neurochemicals in our body. The exposure to what's often called chronic or toxic stress in traumatic and ongoing relationally traumatic, like in complex PTSD childhoods, cannot be understated. Basically, your brain is being washed and soaked in all of these wounds and challenges and responses, and your body needs to sort of decide what's on fire and what's not at all times. And so that repeated process, when it happens again and again and again, really changes the structure of everything. So we can live in this trauma brain. So what does trauma brain look like by and large? I'm going to go through a lot of dynamics here. And then in the next several videos, I'm going to break down these in specific categories and also add them to the larger kind of list that we see in those of us who have complex trauma, certain types of attachment wounds, and things like that. But basically, the exposure to chronic toxic stress damages the prefrontal cortex. It can damage the emotional areas of the brain, and all of those areas are truly impacted. So they impact things like decision making and memory and concentration and affect regulation, how you deal with your emotions. There are three major areas where chronic stress and trauma impact the brain, and those are the reward centers, the memory centers, and the threat areas. Basically, the rewards are teaching us, what behaviors are we supposed to do or not do, what works, what doesn't. That gets impacted. Memory. We have to sacrifice memory aspects to deal with trauma. And so that can affect our ongoing memory, memories of childhood, everyday memories. We can have really clear memories of trauma or moments or points in time, but very bad or non-existent memories of all of the stuff that was also part of our childhood. And we can certainly see it in the threat areas. And that's where we're often living in that hypervigilant fight or flight state, or maybe we're freezing and shut down, or we're fawning, right? Collapsing, attached, cry for help, all of those trauma types. And if you want to check out this video, I have a video discussing even more around those topics. But the bottom line is we can see hypervigilance, where we're sort of always scanning and always on guard for what's going to happen next, often thinking that the worst thing is going to happen next. But our nervous system, our entire mind and body are just like on high alert. We can see a tendency to want to numb out. We can see addictions, distractions being very common and having a hard time focusing, issues with memory. We can certainly see dissociation, right? There's just all of this, like, if you think about the opposite of hypervigilance, we can't live in that every single second. And so I think we're often at risk for extreme numbing out behaviors, whether it's, addictions on shopping or gambling or substances or whatever it is. We have to sometimes turn that off, and nothing feels better than turning it off with something that really removes us from that hyper-vigilant state. We can often struggle with being socially anxious, where human beings are just stressful and where we tend to overanalyze and overassess ourselves. It's hard for us to relax in the company of others. Many of us learn to deal with our emotions alone, or to regulate alone, or we were safer alone. And so there's something about the interaction of other humans that, even though it can be enjoyable at times, can be very, very stressful. And so you'll often find that those of us with childhood trauma tend to isolate. That's when we feel the most calm, the most soothed in our nervous system. And that can also align with more avoidant attachment, where you have that dreamy auto-regulation, but also with families who were unstable and chaotic, where you were only safe when you were, let's say, alone in your room with doors shut. You can certainly struggle with what I call I am bad-ism, where at the core it's just that even though everything in your life looks great and you present great, when you really get cracked down and broken inside, it's like you just believe that it's because you're bad, that you're unlovable or you're unworthy. There's just something wrong with you. Along those lines, we can have a really hard time with self-compassion, right? We are so good at giving it to others, but we really lack it in ourselves. And if at the core you believe you're bad, it's going to be really hard to sort of give yourself a break and say, it's okay, you did your best. Your brain would be saying, no, you didn't. You could always do more. Get up off the sofa. You're so lazy, right? Or whatever it is. Of course you didn't win that award, or you didn't get that promotion. Along those lines, we can make it... I'm so sorry. I made a bunch of videos earlier and my camera was messed up, so I was talking a whole lot earlier. So sorry, it's so annoying for you to hear me do that. Okay, but I don't want to stop because I'm running out of time and I so want to post this. And so we can have a hard time not only being present, but being in relationships. At the core, relationships can feel very stressful and unsafe. We can certainly repeat patterns as a sort of panic response to not being in that childhood. We can actually do things that don't necessarily help us choose healthy partners intentionally. We're not doing it on purpose, right? But it happens. We can have a hard time trusting people. Nowhere is safe and no one is safe. And in a world where the divorce rate is high and infidelity is high, I mean, if you want to look for evidence of people not being worthy, it's everywhere. But that does not mean that people are not worthy and that they can't be trusted. And lastly, I would say we can have really a difficult time with our own emotional regulation. That you can see irritability or, hair trigger tempers or a decrease in emotional activity, but it's just holding it all inside and never really feeling safe enough to let it out. And so what I'm hoping that you'll do with this video, if you do recognize some of these symptoms, is kind of begin to say, yeah, I do see that I'm living in my adult body, but it's like as if I'm still living in my childhood, the way I approach the world. Not that you are immature or babyish, it's nothing like that. It's just that the way your brain takes in information and how it responds, even if it's just initially and you've learned to kind of control it a bit or to reshape it or integrate it, is that initially you go into that trauma brain, right? Where all those things I just talked about on some level exist. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into each one of these plus a whole bunch more in this series. I hope you will consider posting down below as a community. We can't do group therapy in the group I called Loved back in the day, but I want to talk about what it feels like to feel wildly loved with yourself, with the world, and loving ourselves is sort of it's a bit of a fantasy, right? We're not just going to have these childhoods where our adults weren't safe and they weren't reliable and we're just going to wake up and put a sticky note, as I always say, and be like, yeah, I love myself. It's so much more than that. It is about what you do and how you set up your life. And in fact, I do talk a lot about my protocol there in my course called Remothered. So please check that out if that's something you might want to work on. But the core of this is to understand that, yes, our brain, it can feel pretty catastrophic to think about, yes, my brain has all these, modifications, but we know through the concept of neuroplasticity that our brains don't stop changing and forming new connections, and that we can create healing pathways. And those occur through things like connection, meditation, mindfulness, art, therapy, all of these, language, reading, there are so many ways to begin to heal. And so I'm hoping that we can talk more about that. So I would say today, just as a kind of application of this, you might just make a few notes about any of the things I talked about that you think, yeah, I definitely do that. And then we will talk more about them. But I would say to just give you a final moment together that I think is really important. And in fact, we used to end a lot of our groups this way, which is to just do a really quick breathing technique together. And really my favorite one is called square breathing, or people sometimes call it 4 square breathing. But basically all you do is you breathe in for a count of 4, you inhale, you pause and hold it for a count of 4. You exhale, but you sigh, be dramatic. I know it feels embarrassing if you're in someone's office, but trust me, the sigh is so powerful. And then you pause again for a count of 4 and do nothing. And you do that 4 times. So what we're doing with this behavior is we are trying to teach that hyperactivated, hypervigilant brain that there are ways to calm and soothe and make that nervous system and that body response relax. That we don't have to always be in trauma brain, and that we have some healthy ways to get there. So I hope you found that helpful. I will see you tomorrow, like I said, and let's just finish out with, please don't forget how truly worthy you are of being loved, truly wildly loved, uncultivated, untamed kind of love. I know that with your childhood, the lens we got was that love had all these conditions and all these wounds to it. And yeah, a lot of that stuff is like, it's never going to go completely away, but you don't have to live in it. You can learn to master parts of it and to live alongside it without it, driving the bus and taking over your life. And so let's finish with breathing, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Ready? Okay. So we're going to breathe in for a count of 4. Pause. Exhale. I can't do the fingers for a count of 4. And nothing for a count of 4. Let's do that again. Breathing in for a count of 4. I have a problem with my fingers going up and down the right way, but I hope you get the idea, and I hope you will know that just sending more oxygen to your brain and slowing down and breathing is honestly a powerful start to beginning to heal your brain and your story and your life. So see you soon. Take care.